Now, before we get to the G20 meeting, the developed countries seem to have become too relaxed in their systems in terms of moderating, monitoring, regulating. There seemed to be a global free-for-all, which, as I understood it, was intended to buoy the system, to keep things moving. But did they go too far? Who took the wrong step?
I think what happened is that you have different philosophies of economic management which come into vogue at different times. What we have seen over the last 10, 20 years is a sort of market fundamentalism, a complete belief in the market. Yes, the market is the best allocative mechanism, but markets can fail. They can either fail by contracting or they can overheat. So what is necessary is to embed the operations of the market within a regulatory framework that leaves the market free to operate. But when it gets overheated or it contracts too much, when the market fails, there are limits which keep it operating within an acceptable mode. And therefore, what we had here was an abandonment of the need for a role for the state in regulation. The result was, in this environment of, shall I say, lax regulation, there was too much emphasis on freeing the market. The market must be free, but it must be contained within limits so it does not become irrational in any direction. Because either way will destroy economic value, employment, etc. And the other thing is that in the financial sector, because regulations always lag behind the private sector initiative, a lot of products were created which were risky products and risky services, and the regulator authorities did not keep up with that. So the situation became much worse than was realized. And what we now understand is good regulation is important. For example, in Canada, they didn't have this problem with the banks because, whether by good management or by fortuitous events, they had taken measures to shore up their banking system about a year before the mortgage crisis took place. And they are in good shape. But it's not good enough just to have national regulation, because these markets are global and the risks move trans-border, cross-border, and therefore you can't have good management in one section and lax in another. You need common standards, you need common vigilance, and you need cooperation now beyond the G8 into the G20 countries to ensure, because the likely resumption of growth is going to start first in the emerging markets and then spread to the developed. This is new. Usually the developed markets move and then that multiplier effect lifts all boats. Everybody else, this is a different world economy.
Wow. Let's talk about the G20. Which are the countries involved in the G20, the main ones at least?
Let me back up by saying that the lesson of the Great Depression is that you need some sort of mechanism for multilateral management of the global economy. After the Second World War, the IMF was set up to do stabilization of the financial sector. The World Bank was set up to reconstruct and then to develop the poorer countries. That was the framework. However, real power in the governance of the global economy rested initially with the US and then was shared with the G8 countries. And therefore, when there's a major crisis, they get together and decide, we have a new ball game. For the first time, the G20, which was a forum for finance ministers, became a meeting at the level of heads of government. It signals that you can't manage the economy unless you bring in other countries. Now, these countries include Russia, Brazil, India, China, Turkey, Indonesia, Korea. The larger developing countries and the emerging market countries, as well as Russia and China, which don't fit into any of those categories. And therefore, we are seeing the emergence of a new global governance system, at least when it comes to economic events. This is indicative of the fact that the center of gravity of the global economy has been shifting gradually over time towards the east.
Right.
We also are seeing at the political level a multipolar world rather than a unipolar or a bipolar world which characterized the Cold War era. And now the governance structures are beginning to catch up with this. What this means is that it will translate itself into other institutions. For example, in the WTO, decisions were largely made by the Quad, Canada, Japan, US, and the EU. Now, the 4 countries that are dominant include Brazil and India. Now we're seeing on the financial side a G20. What that means now is that the voting rights within the IMF and the World Bank have to be modified because they are now dominated by the US and Europe. And by convention, the IMF is always headed by a European and the World Bank by an American. Obviously, you need to be democratic and transparent and to draw from the biggest pool of talent and select the best person. These are changes to come. So the G20 is important in that what it portends for global management and expose recognition that things have changed, and because of the decisions which it took there, essentially to say, 1, there will be coordination, 2, we will all endeavor to stimulate our economies, fiscal stimulation, 3, we will all tighten up regulation, 4, we will shore up our financial institutions with capital and liquidity, and 5th and last, we'll make sure that the World Bank and the IMF has money to deal with all those who are not members of this privileged club, which is the majority of countries in the world, including the poor and the small like the Caribbean.